All right. So let's go ahead and get this started. Just going to go straight to video.
The New Testament. If you open up the Bible to the table of contents, you'll see it's made up of two large collections, the Old and New Testament. The word testament refers to a covenant partnership, which is what both of these collections are all about. They tell one epic and complicated story of God's covenant partnership with Israel and all of humanity.
So right there, it's kind of, yeah, I like that, breakdown. It's a covenant partnership. So the Old Testament is a covenant, and it's really, multiple covenant partnerships, because you have a number of covenants, but in the the Old Testament, the covenants were pointing more and more to Israel, and then looking at a new covenant that would be cut with Israel herself, but also with people in general, the nations. So the New Testament is the new covenant that's made with Israel, and the new and the covenant that includes the Gentiles. So we have the Old Testament talks about it, but it looks forward to the time when there is going to be a covenant with Israel, and the nations start flowing in, and that's basically what starts happening in Acts. But we did see passages where Jesus was there prioritizing Israel, because his first aim was to fulfill the things that he wanted to, that were needed to be fulfilled with Israel. So he's that's why he talks with the Gentile woman, the way that he does, I kind of calls her a dog or whatever, but then she says even those who are you know even the little dogs like to see crumbs from the master's table and everything, and he applauds her for that. But yeah, so you see the way that the nations are coming in. It may not be the full thrust of it. I think that you'll really see the new covenant come into bloom once you have the day of the Lord and the events after that. But we'd have the beginnings of it now in a big way, and the vast majority of those who are in this covenant, New Testament covenant, are Gentiles. So it's amazing how that worked out.
Testament is called Tanakh in Jewish tradition. It's a unified scroll collection of 39 Israelite texts that were over 1,000 years in the making. In contrast, the 27 books of the New Testament all came into existence within 30 to 40 years of each other. They were all written by first-generation followers of Jesus. From an early period, Christian communities began collecting these texts and reading them alongside the Old Testament as one unified story that leads to Jesus. The New Testament begins with 4 narrative books that together are called the Gospels. They tell the story of Jesus of Nazareth's life, death, and resurrection as an announcement of good news. They're followed by a 5th narrative work called Acts of the Apostles. Here, the risen Jesus.
By the way, good news is whenever there's been a victory from a king that you're waiting. If your king went out to battle, and and they won, you wouldn't know. And so a messenger would be sent to go back to the city and tell people the good news. That's what the good news is about. That there was that the king has won and he's coming back.
The apostles, the word that means the sent ones. They're appointed as.
So yeah, sorry. And so that's when you have that passage. Where is it? Isaiah, Jeremiah. It's how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. That. Yeah, it's if you look at the context in there, it's about somebody who ran back, and their feet or that's the feet of somebody who brings good news. It's the person who, it's like that in that story of Marathon, right? Somebody who ran back and say, I got the good news, we won. So the Acts of the apostles mean the sent ones.
Jesus' representatives to spread the good news about him throughout the ages. After Acts comes a collection of letters from the apostles. These were written to provide teaching and guidance to the local communities of Jesus' followers called churches. There are 13 letters connected to the Apostle Paul, and they're not arranged in the order of when they were written, but rather from the longest to the shortest. Then there's a letter to the Hebrews, written by a close but unnamed associate of the apostle. After this are the letters of James, Jude, Peter, and John. 2 were brothers of Jesus, and 2 were among his first followers. The last New Testament book is the Revelation, a letter to 7 churches that reveals a prophetic word of challenge and comfort to all of Jesus' followers. So those are the books of the New Testament, but what are they about? And how do they connect with the Old Testament to make up one unified story? Think of it this way. The Bible is one long epic narrative with multiple movements or acts. The Old Testament recounts the first series of acts that give you everything you need to make sense of the story to follow. The core themes and the plot conflict are arranged in design patterns. And then in the
Okay, I'll pause right there. So the Old Testament, you get the core themes. Core themes are things we've been talking about: exile, the coming, the coming king, the fallen humanity, and the new humanity that needs to come. The plot conflicts. It's, well, here's the problem. Here's what we know needs to happen, but here's the problem with getting there. And you have all these stories about that make it sound like all hope is gone, but then you've got God promising the whole time that someday this is going to happen. So then you have these design patterns, and the design patterns, of course, in our Bible study over the last year, you've seen those design patterns, and I'll be talking about a couple more. But these are the things that the New Testament is referring to. These core themes, these plot conflicts, how it got resolved, and the design patterns, and how those design patterns have continued into the New Testament, and they're being how Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they and Acts show you how those design patterns are fulfilled, or you see them continue into the New Testament, these design patterns.
New Testament, these are all picked up and carried forward to the story's culmination in Jesus. Let me show you what I mean. The first act is about God and all of humanity. God provides a sweet garden temple for humans who are made to be God's partners in ruling the world. But the humans are foolish, and they get into a dark temptation and rebel against God's wisdom. So they're exiled into a wilderness where they start killing each other. They build cities that spread their selfishness and oppression, leading up to the big bad city of Babylon. But God loves the world and its foolish humans, so he sets in motion a rescue plan by promising the arrival of a new human who will destroy the evil that has lured us into self-destruction. The next act of the biblical story is about God and Israel, and it develops the themes and patterns of the first act. God calls a new humanity out of Babylon into a sweet garden land. Abraham, Sarah, and his descendants, the Israelites. God promises that.
Yeah, so there you have, and I haven't mentioned this before, but the promised land is kind of a new Eden sort of situation. Not only are you going back west, and he's being taken out of the east, out of Babylon, actually, Ur of the Chaldees, the modern day Iraq, but he's being brought into the land of Canaan, which, if you look, that's where the Zion is going to be, Jerusalem. All those themes kind of go back to there. So here you have a pattern here. We'll do a side by side. But if you look at like these two cells or whatever, they're going to look very similar, and you'll see the reflected pattern. So here you are, in a sense, another couple, like Adam and Eve, they're destined for a promised land that sounds a little like Eden. And it starts off from there.
Through them, divine blessing will be restored to all of the nations.
Yeah, so that same thing, the blessing. So the cycle of blessing, blessings, like that are given to Adam and Eve, and being fruitful and multiplying and everything. But those are given to Abraham and Sarah as well, being to be, to a promise to have all these descendants, to be fruitful and to multiply.
These are the new humans that we're waiting for, but the Israelites repeat humanity's rebellion against God, building their own violent cities that lead to self-destruction and
Another Babylon. So this looks like this.
Exile of Babylon. But God sustains his promise that the new human will come from Abraham's lineage. It will be a priest king who will now have to rescue both Israel and humanity from Babylon to restore God's blessing to the world. Now,
Okay. Yeah. So here on the left, you see the promise of the Messiah, the offspring of the woman, the seed of the woman, who is going to step on the head of the serpent, but at the same time also be harmed by the serpent, right? Now you have a new king will rescue Israel and humanity. So that's God's promise. But later we're going to see that this king is also going to be the suffering servant. And that these are the same people. So this is veiled language. And I think we've talked about it before. Why is this language so veiled? And I think there's reasons for it. You don't tell everybody everything that you're going to do, because you're also telling your enemy. So the Satan's domain and the fallen rebellious angels, they don't know what's going on, and there's always been sort of a secret about it, and that's kind of the nature of prophecy. But you see these patterns kind of repeating, and the way that they're presented through the narrative, right?
Notice how these two acts are designed according to the same pattern. The second act is a longer and more violent version of the first, and together they explore the tragic human condition, but they also highlight God's promise, which is developed more in the next act, the Old Testament prophets and poets. The prophets accused Israel and all nations of their evil, and they announced that one day God himself would arrive to bring the day of the Lord and deliver his world from Babylon. He would do it through a promised royal priest who's going to suffer like a slave and die for the sins of Israel and all humanity, but then he'll be exalted as king over the nation. He will call
Okay, so here that we've already seen that there's going to be a king who's going to rule the nations. Then you're finding that it's a priest who's going to be made king, but he's also going to be a suffering priest, or a suffering royal priest. So the picture is getting clearer, and this starts bringing up a question. How can somebody be a royal priest who's suffering, or suffering servant, and at the same time being a conquering king? And how does that story fit together? So it develops some thoughts in the Old Testament world, and in Second Temple time, that, well, maybe it's going to be is it going to be two different people? Or it sounds like it's the same person. So is it two different times? And really, like, once you see that through the lens of Christ coming the first time and dying on the cross, then is promised to come again, then you see that it's split into two different time periods. So you're looking at that. You're looking at those two mountains, and from the prophetic lens, it looks like you're looking up one mountain. You get over the first mountain, you're going, oh, there's another mountain there. So it's that sort of thing. So, but here the prophets are saying Babylon has fallen, and so you're going to have the day of the Lord, and it's going to be an indictment on Babylon, right? Brought by this royal priest.
To leave Babylon and join the new covenant people who will partner with God to rule over a new Jerusalem, that is, over a new creation. And so,
okay, so, and I like this illustration right here, because you see those two you see the two opposing cities. So by the time you get to Revelation, when you read Revelation, it's the tale of two cities. You see on one hand, Babylon and its, and all of the, mystery Babylon and the harlot and everything that's wrong with her, and the way that she's just been the place where, souls of men were all this materialism and and idolatry and oppression and those sorts of things. And juxtaposed to that is the New Jerusalem. And so you have the old humanity, the new humanity, and all of these things are being, the day of the Lord on one hand is very tragic day for those on this side, a very glorious day for those who end up in the New Jerusalem.
Old Testament concludes by anticipating a new acting story. And when you turn to the New Testament, it's the same story, now being carried forward in Jesus. Let's see how. The four gospel accounts introduce Jesus of Nazareth, both as the promised son of Abraham, who will restore God's blessing to the nations, and also as that new human who will defeat evil and.
Okay, yeah. So Jesus is the new human, the Son of Man, right? And he's also the son of Abraham. So he's going to fit the description of the cycle that starts with Adam and Eve and is going to be the one who conquers the snake. But he's also going to be the new humanity, the new Adam, right? And he's going to fit the description of the offspring of Abraham, a new king who will rescue Israel and humanity.
Restore humanity to partnership with God. So Jesus is portrayed as a human and more. He went about announcing the arrival of God's promised kingdom, and he spoke and acted as if he was Israel's divine king. But instead of calling himself king, Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, that is, the human one who would act like a servant. The Gospels are making the claim that. Okay, so, and I'm going to bring this to, once this video is done, and I'm going to bring up a couple of verses here, but you already know this, that he is going to be the new human, right? But there's also something divine about him. So it says Israel's divine king. And what started baffling the biblical readers and scholars, was the fact that you had the Son of Man figure, for one, is somebody who was also sitting next to God on his throne. And this isn't a position where any of the other spiritual beings were in. So the other ones who were called Elohim in the council, and the Holy Council, the ones that have rebelled wanted to aspire to that throne. They wanted to be on top. They wanted to overthrow Yahweh and be on the top of the holy mountain, so to speak, or on the throne. They wanted to rule like him, right? But now you have a human who's up there, and it puts him in a way. He's still subject to God, or God the Father, but he's also God. And the New Testament priests, the Pharisees, they knew this. So this is why, when Jesus says, it starts referring to him as the Son of Man, they're saying blasphemy, because they know that he's calling himself divine. So, but this is a category that they have. So you see, I'm going to show you a passage in a bit that shows that David, he's like, to which of the angels did God ever sit at my right hand? The angels we know are that's the Elohim, or the Malach, but we know that those are the same types of beings, right? There's no other spiritual being that was ever, told, sit by my right hand. And it's, God said to my God, or whatever, so you have this language where you're going, wait, there's somebody who's a human and at the same time is also God. And how is this going to work out? And how can this be? Jesus, Israel's God, has become the faithful Israelite, and the true human that we are all made to be but have failed to be. Jesus' mission was to confront that dark evil that lurks underneath humanity's evil, luring us into selfishness, violence, and death. But how do you defeat that kind of evil? The surprising answer in the Gospels is that Jesus overcame our evil by allowing it to kill him on his paradoxical throne, the cross, where Jesus died for humanity's evil and sin. And it's where he lived out what he taught, that nonviolence, forgiveness, and self-giving love are the most powerful things in the universe. And because God's love for his world is stronger than evil or death, Jesus was raised to new life as the prototype of a new humanity. And this brings us to the story of Acts. Through the Spirit, God empowers Jesus' followers to spread the life and love of Jesus out into the world, as they invite people to leave their old humanity and join Jesus' multi-ethnic family, the new humanity. This is where the letters from the apostles fit into the story. Here, the apostles address early Christian community, and they show how the good news about the risen King Jesus changed history and should reshape every part of our lives. They also explained the good news by constantly appealing to stories from the Old Testament and the stories of Jesus, showing us how to see our own life stories as part of the epic biblical story. So all of humanity is trapped in a Babylonian exile, but Jesus came to create a new home. We're all living in different kinds of Egyptian slavery to selfishness, sin, but Jesus died as the Passover lamb to liberate us into the promised land. Our old humanity is bound to the dust of death, but Jesus' resurrection opened up a new future for a new humanity. We live here in the current evil age, but through Jesus and the Spirit, a new creation has burst open here right now. And this leads us to the book of Revelation.
So
where the full
great parallels here. And this is where and this was this idea that all of humanity is in exile in Babylon is something that the okay, so when the Jews came back from exile and they were sent, they come back to Jerusalem from Babylon, they realize in a sense that they're still in exile. They're still under the thumb of some other authority, whether it's going to be, you know, the Medes and the Persians, or the Greeks or the Romans. By the time that the New Testament is being written, they still they look at you know, they look at Rome and they're saying this is Babylon, this is still exile. But they're also seeing that exile is a theme that goes all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to the exile of Adam and Eve. So that Babylon and the exile of Adam and Eve is something that all of humanity in a way is experiencing. And so the writers like Paul are saying, and from here in Babylon, etc., you know, they're writing as if they're in Babylon. And the idea of Babylon has been transferred into the way the world is. The world is basically Babylon. It's this whole worldly system of oppression and all these things that are counter to the way that God would have a society be. This is the society that tragically humans have made. And so in, you know, like where you have on one hand Babylon and the New Jerusalem, you're going to have the world the way it is and a new home and a new way of living that is going to be the new heavens and new earth. That all of humanity is in slavery in Egypt. It's a slavery to sin, and we talk about that all the time, you know. And you probably heard in your Christian walk growing up, you know, that Egypt was symbolic of sin. Well, it is, you know, it's more than that. And in a sense, the Old Testament even talks about Egypt being Babylon. Sometimes it refers directly to Egypt being a type of Babylon. So then you have this liberation into a promised land where, and you see these themes again in Revelation, where at the other end of it, it's, you know, again, you see a scene where you have the redeemed singing the song of Moses. And it's because they've escaped the slavery of being in Egypt and of being in Babylon. So you've got the old humanity who's going to be in dust, but then you have the new humanity that's going to be given eternal life. You have the evil age, and then you have the renewed creation.
Story comes together in powerful ways. Jesus is portrayed as a slaughtered, bloody lamb who is exalted as the divine king of the world. He's leading his people out of slavery and exile in Babylon. And as they resist Babylon's influence, they may have to suffer alongside their slain leader. But when you follow the risen king, not even death can prevent the dawn of the new creation, which is here depicted as a new Jerusalem garden, both the true home of humanity after its long exile. And so on the Bible's last page, heaven and earth are reunited, and the new humans take up their appointed task in the Bible's first page to rule the world together in love and power of God. The New Testament is a remarkable collection of documents. They represent the testimony of the apostles that points us to the risen Jesus himself. And through God's Spirit, these human words have been speaking a divine word of hope from the first century. Each book shows how God, through Jesus and the Spirit, is leading our world to its ultimate goal in a renewed creation. And so the story's end is really the beginning of a new story that is yet. That's what the New Testament is.
So it's the end is a new story, is just the beginning of a new story that's yet to be told. And I like that ending because it reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote about the new heavens and new earth, where and everything from that then on was everything up until that point had just been sort of the introduction to the story. And here's where the story really begins. Because in comparison to eternity and what the new heavens and new earth is going to be, it's going to be so much, bigger than the whole history of time that we were here, let alone, our short lives that we actually experienced as individuals. And as as New Testament said, the former things are forgotten. As time goes on, it's as if, well, we got off to a rough start, but from then on, we built this new heavens and new earth along with God, and that's really where the story really just began. So I think it's I really like these illustrations because you get kind of like these you get these parallels here, and you can see visually how these stories are kind of are paralleled, and then put either in contrast with each other or in comparison with each other, and those sorts of things. So let me show you the verses that I was oh, actually it's also there. Yeah, so here, to go back to that theme of here in the beginning of Hebrews, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. That exact representation of his being, this is what it means. This is the image. This is the image of God. This is the new humanity, the exact representation of God's being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. The name here basically means the position, the title, all of those things kind of encompassed into one. It's obviously a lot more than what we usually think of as a name. So, and here's the verse that I wanted to point out. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? And that is from Psalm 2:7. And I think that I have, no, I don't. But that's from Psalm 2:7. You are my son, today I have become your father. Or again, I will be his father and he will be my son, which is from 2 Samuel 7:4 and 1 Chronicles 17:13. If you have an NIV Bible, you'll have a footnote about that. So that's why I use the NIV for this. And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. So he's saying that those creatures who were called Elohim and who were, like some people were tempted to worship in the past, is like, no, they're worshiping this Christ, the human, right? Who's also God's son. In speaking of the angels, he says he makes his spirits, angel spirits, and his servants flames of fire, which is found in Psalm 104:4. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. That's Psalm 45:6-7. This is incredible right here. About the Son, he says, your throne, O Elohim. So he's calling the Son Elohim, right? Your throne, O God, will last forever. So he's talking about Jesus the King. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, and it is therefore Elohim, your Elohim, basically in the Hebrew, has set you above your companions. That it's the heavenly council, the Elohim. Those are his companions, or anybody who's in, whether you're talking about the church or if you're talking about the spiritual beings, everybody who's there partnering with God and being in his council. God has set you above your companions. So he's on the throne above them by anointing you with the oil of joy. But it's that wording there in Psalm 45. Psalm 45:6, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, the scepter of your kingdom. You have, therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness. So, you're an Old Testament scholar, back in the day, and you're looking at verses like that, and you're going, what's David thinking? Why is he writing this? And it's inspired, but you're saying this king is David seeing somebody who's going to be a king from his line, who's going to be called God, and who David is calling God, and he's saying, God, you're God. And so it's like, just to make it, it's another one of those things that now that we've gotten used to, that, is he talking about God or is he talking about somebody else? And it's like, the answer is yes. It's always like those, is it this or that? And it's like, yes, it is. It's one of those things that, like, is supposed to stick in your brain. Like, how do you look at this? So when Christ comes on the scene and he's saying that he is this figure, it sets a lot of people off, and he doesn't have to tell them directly. These Pharisees get upset, and even but the people who are seeing it are seeing, Thomas, he puts his hand in Jesus' side and sees that he's risen from the dead, that this is the resurrection, and his response isn't like, this is resurrected humanity. His response is, my Lord, my God. He knows he knows at that point, from his theology, this is God. It's all through the Old Testament, and it's intertwined. There was something that he understood or must have seen at that time, where he's going, this is God, because of what I know from these Psalms and from the perspective of these prophets. The Old Testament is constantly telling you this. These messianic psalms, this Isaiah, Jeremiah, all of these prophets have been talking about this the whole time. And it goes far beyond just, who the Elohim are, but it also puts a frame around the whole thing, um, because you have this spiritual realm full of Elohim in the heavenly council, these angels, these gods, if you want to call them that in English or whatever, but there is this conflict. You have the rebellious ones, and what they want is they want authority here on earth, and they try to do these things that are going to give them a throne or make them feel like they're in power, right? And Satan does a good job of that to a degree, but he never gets the throne of Yahweh's throne. Instead, the humans that he trips up, one of them takes that seat. One of them takes that seat. So it's an affront to all of the spiritual rebellious beings who wanted to run things and be in charge of people and have the world under their thumb and everything, who presented themselves falsely as gods that needed to be worshipped by the nations and by people and all that sort of thing, where the humanity that they oppressed and that they misled all the time, there's a human that comes out of all of that, and then is placed above them all, alongside Yahweh. It's their worst nightmare, so that's when Paul is talking about, that Jesus has been placed above all rule and all authority, and Jesus himself is saying all authority has been given to me. It's like I hold that place now, and he's the one who in Revelation who can hold the scroll, even though nobody in heaven or on earth or under the earth was worthy. That it's the Son of Man who's worthy to do this, and he becomes the perfect unity between man and our Creator, because he was both, and that's where not only heaven meets earth, it's also where humanity becomes one with their Creator, and where we rule with Christ, and those who rule with Christ rule and even judge angels. That's the grand story of the Bible. It's kind of like in a nutshell. So anyway, that's about it, unless we have like some comments or questions or whatever else.
I was just thinking about the world that we live in. You can see, I feel like really think that you can see the spiritual. People
Right.
I went to the cellular. It's probably the
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like right now, it's one of those points where you can really sense sort of a, a spiritual stronghold over governments, you know?
No, I'm recording, so I can turn that off. It's almost like you can see it when you're driving.
Yeah, I'll end this.